Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. And very good morning. Welcome to the Forum on Uyghurs' Plight, Countering Extremism or Religious Discriminations. We are indeed delighted to have our distinguished speakers here at this program. From my extreme right will be Cikgu Azmi, who is well known. And next to me is Dr. Alexander Wain, Mr. or Brother Ahmad Fahmi from the Global Peace Malaysia. And the last but not least, Mr. Hasanal Nur Rashid, the project coordinator from JAS International. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your time coming to this forum. Reports have surfaced recently alleging that the Chinese authorities have been detaining. There are reports, some say up to 1 million, some say there are about 800. So we can put there are thousands of Uyghurs, ethnic Kazakhs, and other members of Muslim minorities in what have been called re-education camp in the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region in China. It has always been widely reported that human rights abuses were rampant in the region, aiming specifically towards ethnic minorities in Xinjiang, particularly Uyghur Muslims, including threats to freedom of religion. The Chinese government, nevertheless, claim that these camps are vocational and educational training center intended to combat extremism. So what we are going to listen to the speakers here, we have quite a balanced speakers this morning. And I think this forum is quite controversial. And I think they are given absolute freedom to give their opinion. Nevertheless, as the main organizer, IAIS, we would not take responsibility of whatever the points that taken, either by the speakers as well as the participants. You may raise your points, your comments, or questions at the end of the discussion. I'm not going to read the introduction, you can read it, but I think the forum that we are having today seeks to look into the issues in Xinjiang in several scopes of discussions. What are the actual situations in Xinjiang? So from the historical perspective, Dr. Alex will share with us the current situations and what's the impact of the relationship between Malaysia and China or the Muslim world. Perhaps Brother Hasanal will share with us. To what extent have there been human rights abuses and religious discrimination towards Uyghur Muslims in China? Is it something to do with Muslims, something to do with religion, or something to do with something else? To what extent has the Chinese treatment of the Uyghurs been shaped by policies for countering terrorism and religious extremism? What are the impacts of the issue on the diplomatic relationship between Malaysia, China, and the Muslim world, and what strategies should be adopted to keep the region in peace and harmony? So with that, we can start with the first speaker, Cikgu Muhammad Azmi Abdul Hamid. The mic is yours.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillah. Salatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and my panel colleagues, and all the good ladies and gentlemen. I thank for the invitation, and I would like also to say my congratulations to this initiative, especially from this institute, who's taken this very good move to educate and inform us about this subject. Now, before I start, I'll be talking quite briefly, not too long. I want to share with you a letter that was sent to me, and I think this should be a good material for us to give our thoughts. It says, yes, I am writing in response to the recent article peace and stability are the most important human rights, written by Mr. M.G. Heng, a Malaysian who has studied in China for 3 years as an international student. I am a Uyghur who has been living in the USA for the last 10 years after living for a short time in Malaysia, and strongly disagree with Heng's depiction of the situation in Xinjiang. In that letter, Heng attempted to justify Chinese governmental oppression of Uyghur Muslims as necessary to protect against terrorism and ensure national security, claiming that the Chinese government's treatment of the people of Xinjiang is similar to how Malaysia government has responded to terrorism. Heng further claimed that the people of Xinjiang are content with their treatment. None of these claims are true or reasonable. The situation in Xinjiang is not similar to the situation in Malaysia. To understand why, it helps to understand a little history about Xinjiang. To start with, the Chinese character Xinjiang means new border, which is clear reference to the fact that Xinjiang is an occupied territory. The name was given to the region by the Qing dynasty when they invaded the region in 1877. Before that time, this place was called Ziyu in Chinese, which means the western area. The people living there are Turkic Muslim people, with Uyghurs forming the majority. Uyghurs are the original people of the region, which is a beautiful, vast, and resource-rich region that makes up 1/6 of China in area. After the invasion in 1877, the Chinese government began a policy of aggressive ethnic assimilation and oppression towards Muslim Uyghurs. This endangered resistance and led to an independence movement that gained independence around the mid-1910s and the formation of the East Turkestan Republic, Islamic Republic in 1933, and later the East Turkestan Republic in 1944. With the help of Soviets, China retook control of the region in 1949, and the East Turkestan, as we Uyghurs refer to the region, has been occupied continuously since then. For decades, Uyghurs have endured the efforts of the government to dominate the region from suffering from the government's enforced birth control policy that led to as many as 1,000 abortions per day. 1,000 abortions per day, to the arrest, detainment, and killing of Uyghur intellectuals, religious leaders, and businessmen. The region was also used for nuclear weapons testing, with 45 tests conducted in the region, leaving generations of Uyghurs to suffer from the negative health effects of testing, of the nuclear testing. What's more, the region has for decades been stripped of local resources to supply demand in inner China, while Uyghurs have been limited economically in healthcare and in education. Uyghurs have tried to react peacefully to petition the government for change, but the Chinese government does not allow protests and has arrested and intimidated those who have tried to make change peacefully. In this environment, decades-long assimilation and oppression, it is true, violence occurred. But where other nations like France have responded in attacks by attempting to find and imprison the people responsible, the Chinese government has chosen to depict Uyghurs protesting for better treatment as violent terrorists and has indiscriminately imprisoned at least 1 million Uyghurs. This stand is contrast to the recent attacks on primary school students in inner China, where the government simply labeled the problem a mental health problem. Further, to raise the issue of the attacks without context, as Heng did, is to ignore the legitimate complaints of mistreatment that Uyghurs have held for decades. The issue in Xinjiang is not of terrorist attacks against the government, but of decades of mistreatment against the people of the region that are now driving a few to commit acts of terrible violence. But can this justify the imprisonment without due process of 1 million Uyghur and the mistreatment of an entire people? Surely not. And if people of the region supposedly support this treatment, why are those Uyghur outside of China universally protesting the government's treatment on social media and demanding their loved ones be released from the camps? Lastly, I would like to point out that Malaysia is not like China. Malaysia has not invaded other nations and treats all ethnic groups equally, respecting people's ethnic identity and religious freedom. This is not the case with China, not just with Uyghurs, but with Tibetans and Mongolians and anyone else that the Chinese Communist Party sees as threats to their control of the country. China is one of the few countries on earth that has no opposition party. It is not a democracy. Civil liberties and human rights do not exist and are not respected. Last year, the government of Malaysia changed following the general election without firing a single gun or shedding a single drop of blood. The same cannot be said of China. That should tell you all you need to know about Uyghur. Now, this is a very telling, short depiction of how the Uyghur feels when people deny what's happening. Now, I have this few minutes to show you some slides here, because the topic that I'm supposed to say is about the evidence. Now, these slides that I've prepared will give you some of the pictorial evidences of what's happening in China. So let's move on to the slide. Oh, sorry, it's with me. This one. Okay. Now, this is more about the history. I'm not going through this because I think we have our intellectuals will portray on this. But you will see that this is the map on the right side, East Turkestan in 1865. But the map on the left side, it said Xinjiang. All right. Now, it was in the history, East Turkestan as an Islamic republic. It was announced Islamic Republic in 1933. Now you will see now that this is Urumqi. I've been there. I've visited Urumqi. And it amazes me that, the writings are still in this Arabic. They still maintain somewhere, even in the airport of Urumqi. People like tourists like us, they won't query you a lot, but I saw and I witnessed in front of my eyes, the ladies were forced to take off the scarf, and the body search was very intruding, and we witnessed how they are being asked, even asked about their father, where their father are, and where their children have been educated. If they come to Malaysia, are they educated in religious schools? So that kind of very intrusive questions to these people when they come back. So these are the cities that it looks very modern, and then the landscape is really, really beautiful. It's almost like going to Kashmir, another place beautiful. It's like Jannah on earth. With the Himalaya mountains and whatnot. And this is the description of Uyghur. I won't go too long on this. You can read later. I can share these slides with you. Later on, you can just copy it from me. You have these faces of the Uyghurs that are still there, but now most are left in the cities are the old people. The young people are all mostly in the camps now. So there are some deserted areas where you won't find any youth or any young people anymore on the streets. Now let me this is a short video, but I won't go into length, but you're talking about the religion, and it has its history there. Islam has come to that region far, far more earlier than to Malaysia. And I think if you talk about, people knowing Islam, they are much earlier than that. So the practice has been there. But then I do not want to show about this beautiful lady. Of course, you are very interested, but let's just say that these are the faces of the Uyghur who are actually unique. So the language, there are this. I think Professor Alex will be able to explain more on the history of this. And these are the scriptures, and this still remains in some of the places. The writings are still like this, and the literature are still there, but it's eroding and it's changing a lot. So you would see this literature still available, but it's all kept in the museum. And these are the famous scholars, traditional scholars before, Yusuf and Hajib and Mahmud Kashgari, recent years, and then you have also some of the scholars amongst them. Famous writers, university professors, these are the people of Uyghurs. I mean, they are not like very backward. They are very highly intellectuals around. And you have their culture, their dances, their musics. I'm just saying that these people are in a way of their own civilization in that part of the map. So we just have to recognize that when they were occupied, just as Palestinians were occupied, what has been happened is that they try to erode and erase everything that belongs to their heritage. So this is some of the pictures that I want to share with you. Very beautiful colored, and these are the traditions, products that you can see, and you can actually, if you go to MK, they are still there. You can actually buy them as souvenirs. These are their kind of food. Lovely. I was just 2 days ago with a family Uyghur in Penang, and I had a treatment with this, and I didn't want to leave the house, and I had to have more. So very delicious food that they have. Now the Uyghur education also, they have the history, and it goes back to the late 19th and the early 20th centuries. And Uyghurs are people who are really intelligent and hardworking. So this is another fact that they want to portray to the world. Many Uyghurs are studying abroad now, especially in Egypt, in Turkey, for religious purposes, and in America or Europe for academic purposes. And now we go to what is happening now, Uyghur. So now Uyghur Muslims have been oppressed by Chinese government, and the whole purpose of China is to disappear Uyghur Muslims from the earth. They are not only disappearing Uyghurs culturally, but also they are forcing every single Uyghur to deny Allah, but only recognize Chinese Communist Party. And this is how it is like in the city now. And you look at this, this is the iconic mosque in the Asghar, and now it's always been surrounded. If you have tourists coming, then they open it for a while. They even force the Uyghurs to go and pray. It looks like everything is fine, but after the tourists gone away, then you have this armies coming back. So this mosque is not to be used, and it is dysfunctional. No Jumat, no daily prayers. Now, another thing is about the state surveillance, that they actually, want every single Uyghur to be under surveillance, under a very, very, closed monitoring, that no one can be free. So you have your phones, it will be detected. You have anything on your emails or whatever. So they are so afraid to even contacting their relatives outside of China. So everything is, being monitored. So this is another. And now they have every lanes, you have CCTV everywhere. So they put up in the villages, in streets, everywhere. So you are actually monitored, and you just cannot be in your private homes, not monitored, because they have people in the homes also to monitor the Uyghur. Now the Uyghurs are forced to be like this, traditionally, the identity of this, and they're trying to change the Uyghurs with a new kind of appearance, and their attire, their makeups, whatever it is. They don't want to be looked as other than just Chinese. So this is another way of, doing this kind of assimilation. But now they are forcing to dress modernized clothes, which is short, and they are being forced like this. Now this picture that they are being cut right in the public, their cloth have been cut because it covers the knees and your thighs, and they want it to be above, so they do it publicly. So this is the thing that I've been saying. Also beards, they don't want the old people to have beards, and they force them to be shaved. So these are the kinds of happenings that have been done there. Now Uyghur tradition is the part of Uyghur's identity. Men's beard is also their ego. But now they are being forced to take off all. I mean, they have to be beardless. Because beards are identity of the Uyghurs. So they go to that extent. All of the men have been forced to shave their beard. And then thousands of mosques, they already are being demolished, and the rest of the mosques are not allowed to enter, only playing a role of tourist attraction or museum. Now, we have our Malaysian brother from MAPIM, who is now in Beijing. Now, I think today he's going to Xinjiang under the state guest, as a state guest from Yadim, Yayasan Da'wah Islamiyah. So now they've been as a guest, and the iconic mosque has been opened, and people are forced to go. When these tourists arrive, they can pray together with the people. So the people said, now everybody must fill up the mosque and show that nothing is happening in that place. So it's basically for tourism. Now the Quran and other Islamic goods, including prayer mats, are all collected from every family and being burned. They singly go to the houses, pick up the Quran, and then they burn them. Okay. Then huge change with the Uyghur population and the Jama'ah going to the mosque. Once it was over-spilled, and now you have it empty, just a physical building of the mosque. Every single item related to Islam are collected and burned. Okay? They even changed the dua, the azan and the tasbih. So what we read after the prayers in tasbih, you have that, most of the mosques, they will have imprinted du'as on the wall, so people will read it. Now they changed that. Even they wanted the scriptures of the azan du'a to be in Chinese, even the tasbih. But the meaning has also changed. It's not just the scriptures. Before the Eid prayer, they must raise the Chinese flag first, then allowed to be to pray by the authority. There's a video, but we don't have the time to see it. But this is what they have to pay allegiance to the Communist Party before you start praying or you start reading the Dua. So you have to sing the national anthem first before you go into the mosque. This is the Hui, the Chinese Muslim video. Again, I just have a very short thing. There are Chinese Muslims, but they have to portray their loyalty with this kind of disciplined, regimented, way of respecting the communist government before they will then do their rituals. So this is a must. Okay? So you see these Muslims in the cabs, they have to do this before they are allowed to go into the mosque or even pray. And then the Muslims are protesting when the Chinese authorities come and demolish the mosque, but always ends up with arrest the people and demolish still. So this is a short video. This is how they are being forced to leave the mosque. So the army comes in and try to pull them out. Now this person died on the age of 82 in the prison because of the torture. The most precious religious Uyghur scholars, Mohamed Saleh Hajim, has died under Chinese custody. He was the man who first translated Quran in Uyghur language. As you can see, Uyghur house a very unique structure, but now the house is also been demolished with the reason of too much Islamic style. So features of Islam is a taboo. Uyghurs have been forced to hang up Chinese flag in their living rooms, main wall, and on the street everywhere before the streets are like this. So, it has to have that character. You have to erase the Islamic character. You have the flags in all lanes, and you have to have the Chinese government presence. And houses are like this on the main wall. They took off all the Islamic items and forced to hang the Chinese flag in every household. So you have Allah and Muhammad and whatever verses of Quran, you have to take it off. And the houses are again like this, and the main wall, they took off all Islamic items, forced to hang the Chinese flag in every household. Thousands of years, the tea culture, they used to go to the tea house, but now they are being forced to drink alcohol. As you can see, Uyghur dance is famous worldwide, but now their dance is also being forced to be a Chinese style. Even, things like this. As you can see, Uyghurs also take very important on family gathering, but now they have to welcome their new relatives who are Chinese government servants for detecting Uyghur Muslims even in their homes, and eat with them together, learn with them together, sleep with them together, and even live with them together. That means they force an official to be accepted in the house and stay there and eat there and do whatever they want. So they go to that extent. Normally every bride should be happy on their wedding day for having new life, but now Uyghur girls are being forced to marry to Chinese. Means that you have to a non-Muslim, and you cannot force your spouse to become Muslim. You just have to marry. These are all sisters of whole ummah, but now almost all Muslim brothers and sisters are being silenced on the non-Muslims, are raping the Muslim sisters. Really, Uyghur children supposed to be like this. They used to be the traditional one, and now they've been changed their features. Uyghur children are being accumulated with Chinese culture. Killing culture is also another thing that is happening. They also sent the children whose both parents are in the concentration camps to the orphanages. Meaning even children are being sent to the camps that are supposed to be educational camps. But now people are really seeing what the camps means. Name with Chinese name, don't allow them to speak Uyghur language. Hard to imagine after 2 years how they can find their parents. They don't even know their parents because they've been separated. 1,000 families have been separated. Now these children, some of them, I've met them in South Thailand, are about 82 families, and children are like this. And the Thai government has decided to just send them back to China, about 40 of them. Now remaining are about almost 30 still. And we are appealing to the Thai government, please send them to Malaysia, and we will ask our Prime Minister to send them to Turkey, because that's what they want. And now it's worldwide know that 3 million Uyghurs are in the Chinese so-called re-education camp as the name of religious extremism and separatism. They started with the biggest Islamic scholars many years ago, already detained so many religious people who simply be the imam, learned Quran and prayed. And now they started to detain academic scholars among Uyghurs, university professors, writers, lawyers, teachers, rich people, artists, singers, even farmers are being detained. So in the name of terrorists, China asked other countries, deported many Uyghur people to China, but after deportation, all of them killed by the government. All their fault is they can't get the passport because the Chinese government rejects Uyghurs' passport application unless you have many money or you have money. And those who really can't stay in their own homeland by the oppression of Chinese authorities and forced to leave their homes, arrested by other countries for illegal passing boards. 2014, more than 200 Uyghurs detained in Thailand on their way to Turkey, and the people who were sent back to China all already died. 11 of those who have been held in Thailand prison during the 4 years escaped from the prison last year, now holding in prison in KL, but they have been released and they have been sent to Turkey, but they are also under the threat of deportation to China as they simply seek help from Malaysia as the Muslims. Uyghur in Thailand, this is the camp in Thailand, in Danok. Danok is just above the Bukit Kayu Hitam. If you go through Kedah to go to Thailand, then you find the first town is called Danok. And that's where the lockup is. And I visited them, and we cook food for them because they refuse to eat anything that are not cooked by Muslims. So we had a partner then, and we cooked for their breakfast, their lunch, and their dinner until today. Uyghurs who deported by China government, half of them have been deported back, and we do not receive any news from them, but most likelihood they have been already sentenced to death because of their treatment. She is a Uyghur student of Technology University in Malaysia for 8 years. In January, before she starts her PhD degree, she went back to East Turkestan for visiting her mom, and now she's also arrested in the concentration camps just because she stayed in Malaysia. Chinese authorities take the people's house when they went to the concentration camps or prison, or the Uyghurs who are living abroad but their house is in Turkestan. It's just like the Jews. You know, the moment you leave the house, and because you are detained for questioning, the house will be taken away. That means if you are released, then you have no homes to go to. Uyghur Muslims are being held in Malaysian government currently. They are not terrorists. All they are oppressed people by Chinese who are seeking for new life in Turkey. They just been arrested on their way to Turkey, holding in here for 4 years. But now I've heard that they have been sent to Turkey. So this inside of the camps is how they treat the people in the camps. That they so-called vocational camps or re-educational camps, or whatever, but these are the pictures that they had leaked out, the tortures that these people are being have to undergo. Inside the camps, people are being forced to learn communist ideology and learn Mandarin. How old, even to this kind of age, they have been forced. Their treatment is very crucial, and also organ harvesting has been done. Now there are reports about this organ harvesting, and when they put to death these people, the relatives are not being told of, and if they get any news of their relatives being sentenced to death, they cannot go and claim the body. So the most likelihood is that their body will be burnt and the ashes and just gone like that. So this is other cases that's happening there. These are relative people who are in the concentration camp, living witness to the international organization. Uyghurs in abroad are constantly protesting for their own relatives who had lost their contact over the 2 years. Many. The ones that I met in Malaysia, secretly they say, I have not been in contact with my father for the last 2 years. Somebody say, I don't even know my husband, whether he's still alive, So those cases comes to us, and we are only listening to them, So the Uyghurs, like them who totally lost their own identity and faith, can live better. So they are being changed to this kind of identity. Words of Indonesian brother while he is in East Turkestan, this is what he said. I can't hear this, but anyway, he's telling about what he saw in Xinjiang. So we can do something about this by. Let me just end my presentation. China is denying all this. At the end of 2016, they started the large-scale arbitrary detainment that was started in end of 2016. But in 13 August 2018, China denies the existence of the camps at United Nations Forum. But on the 2nd October 2018, reports came out about transferring Uyghurs from camps to the jails in other provinces of China. But in 17 October 2018, China admits the existence of the camps. And in December 2018, more detailed reports about mass transferring Uyghur detainees to jails in other provinces of China. It reports an estimated 500,000 Uyghur will be dispersed, transferred to the jails throughout China. Both Uyghur and Mandarin confidentiality agreement about the camps given to not detain Uyghurs to science also got leaked. And on the 7th January 2019, this year, China invites UN to visit staged camp. So they're trying to deny this by using this way of, okay, let's come to China, you'll see for yourself, you look at the situation, everything's okay. But we know, for like this, even the most obvious atrocities in Myanmar, they even invited some diplomats from the OIC countries, and they were being accompanied by the soldiers to go and visit the camps, and everything was been attended to. So this is likewise like China. I mean, if you are a guest of China, you always be, because you cannot go freely, you be only go to places where you can see things are in a good condition. So all these denials and trying to say to the whole world that things are okay, but this is the opposite. Now, my final word, what do we do with this? I was trying to talk to Malaysia government, to the Prime Minister, and ask Malaysia to mediate this with China. Look, if China is always been, very strong about how U.S. is attacking China because of human rights violation and all that, and U.S. is the competitor in many things against China, we cannot, say that what U.S. is saying about China is totally wrong, because there are things that China is doing is really, in front of the news and everything, everybody, sees reports and all that. So I was telling the embassy of China in Malaysia, I was saying, you have to resolve this. If you were to become a balanced power with the U.S., then you cannot continue with this. If you say that, no, China wants to go and invest in Malaysia, in Indonesia, in Pakistan, we are working very much with Islamic countries in African countries and all that. But on the other hand, you are doing this, and they cannot deny, because I confronted them. I said, can you deny this report? They said, no, we are friendly with Muslim countries. I said, my question is, are you doing this? And he stopped answering me. Meaning, there is something that they are hiding. So our call here is that the Malaysian government should come and talk to the Chinese government, while we say that we can collaborate with you economically and in diplomatic affairs, but we cannot allow, and we cannot be silent on this kind of things. They are not only because of their Muslim brothers. You're also attacking Islam. The Hui Chinese Muslims, the Chinese Muslims also are being mistreated. So that was my call, and we have formed a special task force to look into this matter, and we have where is Brother Fadil? We have a compilation of Is he around, Brother Helmi? We compile thick volumes of reports and analysis and write-ups about Uyghur. And from this, when I read one by one, it's impossible for the government of China to say that everything is okay with the Muslim Uyghurs. So that is this thing that we are doing. We are trying to do our advocacy. We are trying to plan some activities. We're going to the mosque. We're going to tell people that this is happening. This is happening not only to the Muslims, but also to other religious minorities like the Christians and the Buddhists. They're also having this kind of pressure by the Chinese government. Thank you so much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullah.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you very much, Cikgu Azmi. He has shared with us the evidence of human rights abuses acquisition in Xinjiang and started with the history, despite the fact that Dr. Alex will be covering that. There are lots of evidences there, but of course, what we were told from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs that the Chinese governments are denying all these things, but that would be their views on that. But we, the organizers, we stand our points and view, but perhaps I think the government is trying to tackle the issue in a diplomatic way. I was told that there are a group of NGOs through Yadim, and like what Cikgu Azmi mentioned, are now in Xinjiang under the, if I say, official visit by the government of China through the embassy here, and perhaps what they are seeing, what shared by Cikgu Azmi, and what being told by others, and let us give perhaps a balanced view on this, inshallah. Let us move to the second speaker, Dr. Alexander Wain, who will be sharing with us the historical perspective of Uyghur.
Yes, so I'm going to take, being a historian, I'm going to take a more historical perspective to try and find the roots of the current problem which has just been described. But first of all, let me just thank the organisers for giving me the opportunity to speak before you today. And it's nice to see so many of you here for such, for the discussion of such an important contemporary issue. So the title of this forum on Uyghurs' plight, countering extremism or religious discrimination. I think that title encourages us to take a binary approach to this issue, to either see it as an attempt to counter extremism, which has gone too far, or as just religious discrimination in the same way that perhaps the Nazis discriminated against the Jews in the 1930s and 40s. But I want to problematize that because I want to get to the heart of why this is happening, and I don't think it has anything to do with countering extremism, or I think that's used as an excuse, and I don't think it's about religious discrimination, although I think it amounts to that type of discrimination. Rather, I think it's really about Chinese nationalism, and it's about Xinjiang's place in the Chinese nation, as the Chinese, as the Han, see this through history. So what I want to do today, briefly, is to go through that history. I'll start by looking at how the Chinese, the government sees Xinjiang and its place in China. Then I want to go through the history of the region and examine its relationship to China and how that relationship has resulted, I think, in what we're seeing today. So the official Chinese position, which is described in various Chinese documents, is that essentially there's been 2,000 years of kind of unbroken Chinese rule, Chinese influence in Xinjiang. So they argue that the region has been a part of China since the Han Dynasty, and that the Uyghurs represent as one of China's 55 officially recognized ethnic minorities, is a Chongzu, or a sub-branch of the racial nation of the Han. So they argue that the region was originally populated by the Han, and then other groups came in to create the Uyghur identity, but essentially the Uyghurs are just a sub-branch of the Han and therefore part of China. Now those views are promoted, as I said, through government documents, but also far more broadly than that. In the museums, for example, in Xinjiang, they only display artifacts which would correlate with this perspective. They ignore any kind of any artifacts, any history which would establish an independent identity for the region. And equally, they present the Uyghurs as nomads prior to the arrival of the Chinese, who the Chinese then, civilized. But this is very problematic, as I'm sure you're already aware. And it contrasts very highly with the Uyghurs' own view of their own history, which I'm now going to go into. So the origin of the Uyghur people, the Uyghur people I should say, is uncertain. But in all probability it traces back as much as 9,000 years to two different groups of people, the Xiongnu, which was a Turkic group from Mongolia, that type of region, so to the north of China, and the Yuchi, who arguably were European, actually, and who migrated towards China several thousands of years ago, and some of their mummies, very well preserved, there's one there, have been found in the region of Xinjiang, in the Tarim Basin. But certainly it's a multi-ethnic region which evolved over time, not just in the Xinjiang region, but further into Central Asia, into the Mongolia region, so not just limited to there. Now the Chinese did early on try to occupy this region, Xinjiang, twice in fact, once during the Han in 140 BC and again during the Tang dynasty in 639, but they were very quickly repulsed. They were thrown out of the region, only there for a few years on each occasion, and they never established a permanent or a lasting presence in the region. In fact, they never really ruled it directly, but only by proxy. So they used local Uyghur rulers to govern on their behalf. And indeed, there have been several Uyghur empires through the centuries. The most important was the Khaganate from 744 to 840, which was based in the Mongolia region, but it stretched out into Xinjiang and further into Central Asia. Now that fell to another Turkic tribe, and that prompted a lot of Uyghur migration into Xinjiang and also into the other parts of China, and resulted in the creation of two other Uyghur empires, the Ganqiao Kingdom, which was 870 to 1036, as you can see there. That was centered on Gansu province in China, with its capital near Changye. And that was eventually incorporated into a Chinese dynasty, the Western Xia. And then there was the Kouchu Kingdom, which was based in eastern Xinjiang, what we think of today. And that, although that was the vassal of a Chinese kingdom, it was independent, and indeed it's the longest lasting kingdom that's ever existed in the region. And that was, as I said, governed by Uyghurs. So there's a long independent history of independent kingdoms, is the point from that, of Uyghur kingdoms, how you want to pronounce it, in the region, independent of any Han involvement. And also, Islam is a big part of that. So during the 10th century, the multi-ethnic Karakanid dynasty was formed in western Xinjiang, which is the Tarim Basin region, centered on Kashgar. They said it was multi-ethnic, but they were ruled by Uyghurs. And in 955, one of their rulers, Bughra Khan Satuk, became the first Turkic ruler to convert to Islam. And then by the 11th century, the majority of Uyghurs in the Tarim Basin, in the western region, were already Muslim. And Kashgar by that time had become an important center of Islamic learning, as was briefly covered before. Very quickly, that identity was consolidated. So in 1209, the Karakhanids voluntarily submitted to the Mongols, and this ultimately facilitated the further Islamization of the whole of Xinjiang, because the western part of Xinjiang eventually became part of Mogolistan, and during the mid-14th century, that empire converted to Islam, along with many other Mongol empires of Central Asia and the Middle East, the Ilkhanids and so on. So then from the 1390s, the Sultan of that kingdom, Kiza Koja, conquered the Gochu kingdom, which I mentioned before, which was Buddhist and ruled over the eastern part of Xinjiang. And so by the 16th century, most Uyghurs were already Muslim by that point. Then in 1678, as Sufism spread through the region, the Naqshbandi Sufis seized control of Xinjiang and formed the Koja Khanate. But the point here, what I want to highlight is that by 1678, certainly, and before that, a Turkic Islamic Uyghur identity had formed in Xinjiang, independently of any Chinese influence. Right? In fact, the Chinese influence only really comes after this period. So after the Kojas, the dynasty I just mentioned, came to power, they very quickly fragmented into two main groups, the Afakiya and the Ishraqiya, and they were warring between themselves. And this allowed the Qianlong emperor, the most illustrious emperor of the Qing dynasty, kind of the Manchu Shah of the Qing dynasty, to take advantage of this weakness he saw in Xinjiang and invade and establish Chinese rule. Now that was military rule to begin with, right? Xinjiang wasn't considered a province of China at this point. It was an occupied territory, as was briefly mentioned before. And they kept their rule going by pitting the different Uyghur tribes against each other, right? And the different ethnic groups, the Uzbeks and the Kazakhs and so on, who also live in this region. The Chinese who came in would pit these two tribes against each other in a kind of divide and rule strategy, right? You know, take disputes which are there already pre-existing and make them worse, show favor to some tribes over other tribes in order to provoke conflict. And that's how they maintain control. But the Uyghurs always saw them, as the Chinese, as an invading foreign power. They've always seen them in this way. And indeed, there were numerous rebellions following this takeover in 1757. Initially, these were led by the Kojas, the dynasty which had been defeated. But eventually, they diversified and became the various nationalists were taking control of these revolts, the most notable of which was by Yaqub Beg, who's pictured there, who led a revolt which led between 1864 and 1877 in the formation of an independent kingdom in Xinjiang, and was supported by Russia. And that's important because it sets a pattern in Xinjiang, I think. So as we go into the 20th century, with the formation of the Republic of China in 1912, after the Qing were dissolved. Now they first, I should say that they adopted a greater Han policy, so they were very much interested in acculturating Xinjiang, which by this time had become a province, and enforcing a Han identity on the Uyghurs in order to make them more part of China. You know, with the idea of Chinese nationalism and the sacred unity of China, of the Han population. They were very much into this. But as a result of that, further rebellions ensued during the course of the early 20th century, the most important of which led to the formation of two independent states. So the Turkish Islamic Republic of Eastern Turkestan, which existed very briefly from 1933 to 4, and then the East Turkestan Republic, which was more long-lasting, 1944 to 1949. Now these were able to be established because of the weakness of the Republic of China. They were fighting the Japanese in the east, and also later on the communists during the Civil War. And the weakness of the Republic allowed these two breakaway kingdoms to form, and indeed resulted in the formation of coalition governments, even when they were the Republic of China tried to bring them back into the fold. They found it necessary to adopt a coalition government. So Han and Uyghurs ruled Xinjiang together, rather than that of Han dominance. So a pattern continued through the early 20th century of continual efforts by the Uyghurs to break away, right? Because they still thought of themselves as an occupied territory, not as part of China, even though China itself, by adopting Xinjiang as a province, had started to see differently, and started to try and promote acculturation. So going now into under the People's Republic of China, so the communist regime, which was established in 1949, 1st of October. Now the People's Republic, the Chinese Communist Party, I just say, had initially favoured self-determination and even cessation for places like Xinjiang, that the minorities of China could break away from the dominant Han, form their own nations. But by the time they came to power, they had reversed that perspective. And again, they were very much interested in the idea of a greater Han and the unity of China. Having said that, because they were also weak when they first came to power, to maintain Uyghur support, they favoured coalition rule again in Xinjiang. So they allowed a Uyghur governor to govern the region, as had been the case before. And religious freedom was also permitted. So Uyghur religious institutions were established over the early 1950s, including the Xinjiang Islamic Association in 1953 and the Institute of Islamic Theology in 1955. Nevertheless, the Chinese Communist Party remained very cautious towards the Uyghurs. They remembered the history of rebellion, and they were concerned about this happening again. And indeed, although they had promised the Uyghurs autonomous status at the beginning in 1949, it took them 6 years to actually grant that. In other regions, it was granted much quicker. But it took 6 years for Xinjiang because of their concerns about this province breaking away. And very, very quickly, those concerns were linked to religion. So in 1955, the first party secretary of Xinjiang, Wang Inmao, stated that the Uyghur religious leaders were still seeking to undermine unity by distorting the spirit of religious freedom. So very quickly, under the communists, there was this association between Islam and the possibility of rebellion. I mean, it wasn't framed in ethnic terms, it was framed very much in religious terms, that Islam was the driving force behind any effort to break away from China. And indeed, they underwent many efforts to try and weaken the Uyghurs politically. So they moved the leaders of the previous republic away from Xinjiang to try and weaken the organization. And they divided Xinjiang into many different so-called autonomous provinces, which were divided between different ethnicities. So they weren't divided equally between the Uyghurs and, say, the Kazakhs or the Uzbeks or so on. They were split, the different ethnic groups were split between the different regions in order, again, to weaken their organization so they couldn't organize very easily across the boundaries. So it was a divide and rule policy again. And then Islamic institutions, the ones I mentioned, were broken up. And also here we start to see the beginning of the kind of concentration camps or the re-education camps that were mentioned before. So by the late 1950s, up to 35,000 Uyghurs had been sent to labor camps for, again, ideological reform, the same kind of thing we see today. But this came to a head after 1957, when the Uyghur leaders attending the Democratic Symposium organized in Xinjiang demanded those 5 points there. They demanded that Xinjiang be renamed East Turkestan or Uyghurstan in recognition of its history, of its independent history, that all Han migration, which has already begun, cease to the province, that Uyghur representation in the regional government be increased, and that socialist transformation of Xinjiang be suspended because it was viewed as un-Islamic, and that the province ultimately be granted its independence. Now, there was a lot of opposition to that, obviously, during this meeting, but nonetheless, these Uyghur leaders repeated the demands to Mao Zedong during the same year, and this resulted in an immediate crackdown. All those leaders who delivered these demands were expelled from the Communist Party and sent to the re-education camps. And it's from that point that we see the beginnings, we see the trend that we saw, that we've already seen in the previous presentation, of this crackdown on Uyghur identity. This is when we see it beginning to take shape and then persisting down to the present, right? And it comes out of this history, this long history of Uyghur independence, of Uyghur separate cultural identity. So that's the list of things. I mean, I think that this was pretty much covered the kind of things which are going on in Xinjiang and have been going on for some time. But let me just say that since 9/11, these efforts have intensified. This is partly because of the perceived threat of international Islamic terrorism, Al-Qaeda and ISIS and groups like that. The Chinese government see the violent nature of these groups and are concerned that that kind of terrorism will be imported into Xinjiang and accelerate any process of rebellion or seeking independence in the province. So this has, I think, resulted in the acceleration, given the historical context, it's resulted in the acceleration of this process of re-education and of limiting Uyghur identity, as has been covered, I think, very well before. But also, it should be borne in mind that Xinjiang's role in the belts and roads, the belt and road policy that the Chinese government is currently pursuing, because a lot of that involves bringing oil and goods and so on through Central Asia and into China that way, so that the US can't disrupt trade routes to China that currently go through the Indian Ocean, through the Straits of Malacca and round through the South China Sea. The Chinese are putting a lot of emphasis on this route across Central Asia, putting a lot of money into Pakistan to build trade routes, improve communication and build pipelines and so on through the region. And Xinjiang is crucial to that, because it is through that region that these things will come into China. So if China were to lose this province, or it to become hostile or riven by civil war, this would be a major problem for the economic development of China. So I think that is a further problem. So to conclude, I think that the current situation in Xinjiang is largely the product of the region's history and must be understood within that context. We should avoid talking in abstract terms of crackdowns on terrorism or discrimination. These tend to be politicized and seen in very narrow, immediate terms. I think the cause of this problem goes back many centuries, and that needs to be acknowledged when we come to thinking of a solution. Now, I don't want to think too much about finding a solution, but I just want to make 2 points, really, that any solution to this problem must be both pragmatic and moderate. Now, that will take many forms, but I think from the side of the Uyghurs, it must be, although their identity, independent identity, it must be acknowledged, it must also be acknowledged that they are currently citizens of China. Whether they like that or not, that's the reality. And the Chinese, it's a very powerful country. It's only going to become more powerful over the coming decades, and perhaps realistically, unless the situation changes, perhaps it becomes more democratic and open to a referendum or some kind of devolution, the Uyghurs perhaps should not pursue independence, at least for the time being. So that kind of pragmatism, I think, would help the Chinese government become more comfortable with their presence and with their identity. But also the Chinese government, I think most importantly, must recognize the right of the Uyghurs to their cultural self-determination, including the practice of Islam, and that oppression, the kind of things that we're seeing, rather than reducing the threat of terrorism, will only increase the threat of terrorism, because it will create grievances where perhaps there haven't been any, or make the grievances that did exist far worse. And on that I will end, so thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Dr. Alexander Wain, for sharing with us the historical perspective on Uyghurs. I think the 2 points that he shared with us under that last section of the conclusion, that I think it is a quite important conclusion where we can take important steps on that matter. I think from the first speaker to the second speaker, we can see there are lots of similarities of the points, despite Dr. Alexander concentrating on the historical perspective. Cikgu Azmi started with that as well. I think we can see this Uyghur culture should be kept and remain as one of the identity of them. We move to the third presenter, Ahmad Fahmi Muhammad Samsudin from the Global Peace Malaysia.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh. Very good morning to all of you. First and foremost, I would like to extend my gratitude for the organizing committee, especially Dr. Azam, for inviting us to share on this very important topic on Uyghur plight. But before that, of course, being the third speaker, I mean, Dr. Azam speak earlier that the important point has been taken away, and also some of you, before you came here, you must have some thought on this very particular issue on Uyghur. But most importantly, of course, I'm here today, but on another note, I will explain to you that we are boycotting the invitation from the Chinese government, because they also invite me, I mean, representing MAPIM and also Global Peace Mission, to be there in Beijing, and maybe there will some visit to Urumqi and some other places. But we understood that before, I mean, our discussion, because mainly from my presentation, it basically is my experience together with other friends, other leaders of Uyghur communities who are now live in diaspora. Many of them now residing in, whether in Australia, in Saudi, in Turkey, and other places. They are not, even though they say that we are proud to say that I'm holding the Chinese passport, but looking at the situation now, they are now outside of the countries. So my presentation today is basically out of discussion and also some testimonial coming from students also. Many of the Uyghur students also are here, but due to this issue, might as well they are in the what you call hard situation. They even doesn't what you call understand or trust each other. This is only not here, but I think in China also they got the similar thing. Those who are now studying in Malaysia, they will be called by the authority to call them to going back to China, and some difficulties that we are facing as for students here in Malaysia or for the normal citizen here, if they want to renew their passport or visa, so they need to go to China rather than just going to the embassy and got some approval for their renewal of passport. So many of them, when they return back to China, they are lost. They are disappeared. Nothing news heard. Like Cikgu Azmi explained just now, one of the students went back and we don't know their condition right now. So basically my topic today is about the Chinization of Uyghur, but later I will explain that the definition might be different. Of course, in May 2014, we are referring to one of the campaign led by the China government, is Strike Hard campaign. The campaign is basically for the violence, terrorism. These are the main important aspect that the China government tell to the world. that those who are now in concentration camp, those who are in what you call re-educational camp, the vocational training camp, is basically need to go to further study. Even though we are now, if we look at the statistic, if you look at the data, if you look at the list of those who are in concentration camp, we've noticed that there are many professors there, many Uyghur who are well known to the societies. So the question is that what's need you to be there? What's need you to be re-educated? So the main reason for them is basically, I will explain in terms three definition. The radical elements that the Chinese government are trying to what we call to the Uyghur people. Firstly, of course, on the issue of separatism. Based on the historical presentation just now, we understand that Uyghur in history, they had their own flag, they had their own identity, they had own tradition and whatnot. So, of course, if ask the question whether you want to separate from China, the question, I mean, I was also scolded by my friend, Uyghur friends, that this is not true question. This is not right question to answer, to ask to me. Because, of course, we believe that we are proud to say that we are Uyghur. We are belong to East Turkestan. But we can discuss, I mean, on this issue. But rather, I mean, but now they say that we need to focus on the very important issue on freeing those who are in concentration camp. So the reason why they also claiming that they are now becoming extremists, and the thirdly is basically on the religious terrorism. So these three definition or the radical elements that the China government is using, so that now those, I mean, who are now in concentration camp, we can see from the satellite. I think you can also read from the report, and there are many, I mean, journalists who are also invited by the Chinese government to see by themselves. They have been what we call together with the other visitors, and they decided to be alone after the what we call the arrangement from the official. So we can see the differences, whether they are going together, whether they are going by themselves. So the next point for me to highlight is basically on the categories that they are using on the high-tech mass surveillance system, basically from the Strike Hard campaign. So they now divided the Uyghur people into three categories. Firstly is trustworthy, secondly is average and untrustworthy. So basically on the mass surveillance system, we know already from the Cikgu Azmi presentation just now, they are using many sophisticated items, and also they are using CCTVs to monitor your background. And in fact, if you they find out that your consumption is higher than previous week or previous day, they just what we call immediately taken you to the concentration camp. So there are many what we call the plight of Uyghur now. They are facing in terms of the mass detention. Of course, there are millions of them. They are also facing the religious repression. They cannot practice their religion. They begin torture inside the concentration camp. They arbitrarily arrest without any valid reason. And other than vocational training, they are also, if I'm referring to the topic given, the Chinization of Uyghur and humanitarian aspect. Of course, I'm trying to find this the word Chinization, but the true definition or the close definition towards this issue that need to be highlighted today is basically this Sinizations, which is the process where traditionally non-Chinese society are placed under the influence of the Han Chinese, the dominant ethnicity of China, in order to adapt the latter culture, custom, and way of life. So we understand that I mean, the pressure from our Uyghur brothers and sisters today, because of their involvement and their tradition is different. If you look at the face of our Uyghur brother, they are more likely to our Turkish friends. And if you look at my face, of course, my face is basically more likely to Chinese. So basically these are the tradition. So the Sinization aspect that they are facing right now in terms of their religion, language, culture, behavior, speech, dressing, and also the tradition. And basically from the presentation earlier, we noticed that these are the image of the mosque in Uyghur. But to add more, I mean the additional point, if you are under 18 years old, you are not allowed to enter the mosque. And in Friday's sermon, the imam must be going through check-up with the official to check whether this khutbah is valid or not. So these are the things that they are facing. And of course from the tradition, some of the worship places has been destroyed and turned to pub. Some of them also now being using to sell alcoholic. And of course, we have seen earlier on the destroying of the Quran and Uyghur language. These are the part of hardship that the Uyghur people is facing right now. And of course, in Al-Quran, the translation of Al-Quran in Uyghur language need to be confined with the Chinese authority. So that the terjemahan or the what we call the translation of Al-Quran to the Uyghur language is not the same like in Malay or English to Arabic. So these are the struggle that they are facing right now. So I would like to also touch on the issue of the Uyghur kids, because if we said that Chinization or Sinization is happening now, this not only involved with those who are now in the concentration camp. So they must be what we call gone through certain daily activities. You need to sing a song, you need to understand the culture, behavior, and also I was noticed that if you already master the Chinese language, I mean more than 1,000 of them, then you can release. So this also have been facing by our Uyghur kids. These are the situation whereby the Uyghur kids used to be before, but now they are also facing the issue of Hanification, the Hanification of Uyghur children, and they are being cut off from their roots. And they are being what we call misplaced. Some of them also sending to other region, because in Uyghur, in Xinjiang, the size of Uyghur, the size is approximately 1.82 million kilometers square, compared to the China as a whole is almost 9 million kilometers square. And of course, if the Uyghur children now being cut off by the families, we are questioning about their religious tradition. And in future, of course, these kids also now forced to become orphanage. There are many of them, and I will also, check with my colleague here whether this has been also, practicing by other Chinese or other kids in other parts of the China. But they say this is only applicable or only being trained by the Uyghur community in Xinjiang. These are the activities that they need to go for every day. Some of them need to attend classes. They need to learn and need to know how to song. I think for us here in Malaysia, there's not issue for us to learn Mandarin, right? But of course, if you are being forced to learn, by forcing is quite difficult for us to accept. But look at of this the issue of Uyghur, the marriage also part of the way how they want to to stop the ethnicity of Uyghur. So the marriage between the Uyghur and also the Han people is one of the the situation that they are facing right now. And you can see also the differences of the marriage tradition from the Chinese background and also from the Uyghur side. So the one who actually wearing the white is basically the ethnic Han ethnicity, but the one that must wear the red tradition, you need to have your face white, is the Uyghur women. And they are forcing to marry with the Han people. And look at from the historical background, I mean the Uyghur, they are the majority in Xinjiang. But now, I mean the Han ethnics now is pretty dominant in the country. The government also giving them some allocation, some incentive or promotion. I mean to have more Chinese authorities like a cash promote inter-ethnic marriage. So these are the encouragement by the government, and they are also encourage other ethnicity to come to Uyghur, to Xinjiang, to expand their business and whatnot. So now the Uyghur community also is facing difficulties in terms of the economic, because firstly because of the language, they are not mastering the language, so it's quite a difficulty for them to compete with Han ethnicity. So they will facing difficulties in terms of getting money, income. The price of the food is quite high, and now this difficulty is also will create another problem. We have seen before when Uyghur ladies, I've told in 2009 when the riot happened, is when the sister of Uyghur, the woman of the Uyghur, have been sent to other parts of the China just to be the cheap labor, and some of them also died and also facing difficulties, and some of the group of Uyghur trying to get answer for the issue, but they involved in riots. And other than that, of course, Han Chinese forces also to live with the Uyghur families. We know about this, but they have a special program on this. The program name is Becoming Family. Family in Focus. It's like anak angkat. Basically, they will come for more than 5 days in 2 months, and you just come and sleep and also stay together with your family. And from there, they also mentioned that these are the cadre of the party, Communist Party, and they can identify whether this family is implementing or practicing religion in the context of their religion practices. So if they find out that this family is practicing Muslim tradition or Islamic religion, then immediately this family will count and bring it to the concentration camp. So if you stay together with them, of course, in terms of their food, you must serve alcoholic and also big. And during Ramadan, of course, these are the pictures that all of us know. Publicly they invited you to come for lunch. So if you are not coming, and also they just want to identify whether you are practicing Muslim or not, whether you are fasting or not, you just come for lunch, and we give you alcohol and you just drink. So last part I need to touch on this topic is basically on the response, especially from the Islamic world. Because Malaysia is one of the country that now becoming focus from other people who are now survive, and also many of them coming here, our brother from Lebanon, Syria, Palestine, our Uyghur also coming here. So Malaysia, of course, they are looking at us, what our stand, what our action, and they are quite deep, silent response, especially from the Muslim world, except for a few demonstration in countries like Indonesia, Bangladesh, and Malaysia. But this also due to some restriction Of course, we know about the program of One Belt, One Road. These are the very important program for the Chinese government. They want to expand and also to spread out their power in terms of their economic activities throughout to more than 150 countries. So my friend also just returned from Sri Lanka. So I have been there before in 2009. But they say that the difference condition of Sri Lanka as for today and previous for the past 5 to 10 years is quite different. I mean, if we notice that, I think if you are having Facebook, Nas Daily, the one who actually producing a 1-minute video, they also showing us what the Chinese government is doing to other countries, especially for the Muslim countries. Of course, many of countries now facing indebtedness in terms of the investment. I will show you on the Malaysian record. And Turkey is one of the countries that now speaking up against the Chinese government. I mean, their statement previously from the foreign minister as well, the Erdogan also is touching on this very important issue. And how about Malaysia? Of course, there are many Uyghur also coming here to Malaysia. They are seek for refugees. But I mean, the one that we did is basically to help them, assist them in terms of their legal condition. I was previously being one of the Uyghur. We need to go and seek them, ask them to report weekly to the police station, and instead of bringing back, because China government asked him to send them back to China. So Malaysia, I think, the Dun government under Tun Mahathir Mohamed, instead of sending back to China, but these Uyghur, refugees. They are calling refugees, sending to the Turkey government. And of course, Pakistan, Iran, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Palestine, other countries supported Chinese policy and is dealing with Uyghur. But if you look at from the Malaysian perspective, I just want to highlight some of the very important point here in terms of total trade volume between Malaysia and China, because China is very powerful. We of course, majority of us, in terms of trade and bilateral between two countries, we are relying on China very much. Indeed, in 2018, the record high is almost 443 billion. And also people, Chinese coming to Malaysia is almost 3 million last year. And Malaysia and China had jointly set a target in reaching bilateral trade up to 160,000 billion by 2020. And personally, I got experience to speak on this issue with Dr. Mahathir Mohamed, our Prime Minister right now. Of course, he said to me that we need to be strategized on this very particular issue. Even though we are very angry with what China did to our Muslim brother, it's not only for Uyghur but to other ethnicity like Kazakhstan and others. But we need to ensure that we must be strategic. We must be, in terms of diplomatically, we need to be wise. Because of this issue, of course, we cannot rely on this. Just imagine if China cut everything. They are not sending, the student here or whatnot. But the other question, if we, as a Muslim here, most of us are here in Muslim, we are very vocal in terms of the issue of Palestine. We are very vocal on the issue of Syria and other issues. But why? For the issue of Uyghur, we are silent, or we are afraid. We are thinking of diplomatically rather than other issue. We are very, very strong in terms of our statement and whatnot. So these are the things that. But of course, I think these are the role. The position of the government is very clear. But I ask, what are the approach that the civil society can do on behalf of this issue? So he said, up to you. So basically, this is like a green, approval for us to highlight more on this very, very pertinent issue of the Uyghur. And of course, the recent visit from the Prince Mohammed bin Salman, I think we know that the stand of the Saudi government here, Saudi Crown Prince defend China right to put Uyghur Muslim in concentration camp. So these are the statement made by so-called Muslim leaders. It's quite disappointed. And basically from the WikiLeaks information got in 2009, you can read it, the WikiLeaks, also mentioned that how China's government is lobbying many Muslim countries not to bring this issue to be put forward in the OIC conference, to be tabled and to be motion, to discuss further on this issue. So we see these are the things that we are now facing. In terms of humanitarian aspect, what we did is basically we are giving the opportunity. Some of them are very happy. For them, they say that this is the first time for us as a leader of Uyghur community to be here in Malaysia to speak on behalf of our plight, our community throughout the countries. So we are giving them some opportunity to visit some of the media agencies, to share their talks and also to share some of their experience, because somehow, even though they are in other countries like Australia, like Turkey and others, but they still believe that we have the responsible. Because I ask, are you not afraid of coming here? Are you not afraid if you are detained and asked, or maybe you disappear somehow? So they say that if we're not, who? So they take the responsibility. There are many actually Uyghur leaders now are very actively in their media social, in Twitter and whatnot to explain and also to reach out their issue to the world. So now what we did in terms of course the humanitarian, we cannot access directly to the country, but rather we are helping them in terms of giving their experience, to share whatever issues that they are facing right now to the general public. And we also got the opportunity to some extent to provide a special khutbah for the Jumaat. Of course, this khutbah cannot be scrutinized by the government, but rather this the opportunity for us to engage with the public as a whole using khutbah, on Jumaat sermon, to give some awareness on this campaign. So basically some of the mosques were giving us the opportunity also to invite this leader to give their khutbah. And lastly, of course, we from the Global Peace Mission Malaysia, we are now engaged and also trying to get fund to help our Uyghur leaders on this particular occasion. And basically from this assessment and also engagement that we have, partly, inshallah, if not all, we can release their relief.
And I think we must thank God. We are given the opportunity of freedom to practice our religion in this very peaceful country in Malaysia. Let us move to the last speaker, the Uyghur effect, impacts on foreign policy and diplomatic relations with China, which will be shared by Mr. Hasanal Nur Rashid. Perhaps he will share with us his own experience living in China for about a year when he was studying there, and perhaps from that experience will give a different scenario of what would be the discussion looks like. With that, Hasanal, please.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning to everyone here. I would like to first thank IAIS for the opportunity to be speaking on the Uyghur issue, which I personally feel is a very important issue, especially when discussing about geopolitics and international relations in the contemporary world. But as mentioned before as well, since I am the fourth speaker, a lot of my points have already been mentioned much more elaborately and eloquently by the previous speakers. But I will be sharing maybe on certain points that may be differing a little bit to my the previous speakers, and hopefully we'll have a lively discussion after this on the matter. Now, on the Uyghur effect and its impacts on foreign policy and diplomatic relations with China, China has had a long-spanning relationship with the Muslim world, dating back to even the first Islamic Caliphate, as well as the Tang dynasty, which had ruled China spanning the 7th to the 10th century. Malaysia has also shared this long history of China, dating back to the Ming dynasty of China, which had protected Malacca and the Sultanate from the enemies, and had threatened its rule and the trade routes in the Malacca Straits into the larger South China Sea. The cultural influence of the Chinese as we see it today and how it has shaped itself to be a significant characteristic of Southeast Asian culture proves this very long history. China itself has 23 million Muslims, with an estimated 13.4 million living in the Xinjiang province. In Beijing itself, when I was living there, there was about 250,000 Muslims who identify as part of the Hui ethnic groups. And in Beijing, you can see a very strong evidence of China's long history with the Muslim world over there as well. However, what has perhaps driven the closer cooperation of the Islamic world and China had followed after the age of colonialism, with many countries gaining independence in the 19th and 20th century. The colonial experience had resulted in many injustices that still characterize and fuel much of our contemporary 21st century conflicts, and it was only natural that this would actually bring closer the Muslim world and China together. And of course, as we all are familiar with contemporary politics, despite the ongoing sea territorial disputes in the South China Sea, Malaysia and Indonesia have all had relatively warm and highly economical cooperative relationships with China as it seeks to establish its Itailu, the One Belt, One Road initiative, providing and financing infrastructures throughout Eurasia and Northeast. And perhaps the most significant of all would be the relationship actually with China and Pakistan, with the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor highlighting the ever-growing economic and military cooperation. China has also engaged in many cultural outreach programs, as evidenced in Pakistan. This is made evident by the students who now go to China and learn from the Chinese-based institutions. The two countries have even at one point had a relationship compared to that with Israel and the United States. Therefore, through contrasting this historical backdrop, the question that needs to be put forward is this: why would China jeopardize centuries of historical relationships just to pursue and persecute an ethnic community solely for their spiritual belief? Is there perhaps a large geopolitical game that is being played? Perhaps it would be best if we look into the nature of a lot of these accusations that have been aimed towards China first. The Uyghur in the Xinjiang province has always faced a great degree of suppressive treatment from the Chinese Communist Party, as previously mentioned by my fellow speakers. As part of China's strategic industrialization and development, the Communist Party had invested considerable amount of resources on their modernization programs in Xinjiang. This is mainly due to the fact the Xinjiang region is an oil-rich and gas-rich based region that borders 8 other nations and is key to the further industrial progress of China. Before the recent Chinese industrial boom, which saw the Chinese economy grow into a far more significant way, the Uyghurs had enjoyed some semblance of autonomy. The criticisms in regards to China's treatment towards the Uyghurs began to emerge around this time, as many of these provincial development plans were set to place and subvert much of the Uyghurs' language and culture, replacing it with the standard Mandarin language and the Chinese education, as you have seen in the previous slides. This would fit in line with the ongoing Chinese effort to create a homogenized Chinese culture. Separatist cultures, as seen by the Chinese state, and ideologies that do not follow this line are treated as being potentially harmful to social unity in China and may cause disruption to governance and the daily life of China. And this is something that China has always been very concerned about. Now, this fear was compounded after the 2009 Urumqi riots, which were a series of violent riots that broke out in the capital city of the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region, which had escalated in violent attacks. The official death toll from the Chinese government was about 197 people, with many of them being said to be actually of the Han Chinese group. But many organizations disputed these claims, and they speculated the number was even higher. What caused the violence is disputed. The Chinese government said it was organized externally by the World Uyghur Congress, who they claim to be associated with the East Turkestan Islamic movement, a separatist group that has been labeled by both the UN Security Council, the Chinese government, and even the US as a terrorist organization. While Uyghur exile group stated that it was actually because of the excessive police treatment that caused the violence. The truth actually is more towards the widespread unemployment, the alleged workplace discriminations, and the considerable and sudden influx of the Han people into the province, which has substantially altered much of the province's demographic and the social cultural makeup during this time. And this is actually more the real cause of the discontent felt by the Uyghur people. Regardless, the violence had put the Uyghur under the suspicion of the Chinese government, and it did give a sense of validity to that there being a separatist ideology. The Chinese society is more concerned with the well-being of its nation, its government, and its people. And this, to them, was the perfect justification to introduce high levels of surveillance and suppressive policies in the region itself. In 2015, China passed the counterterrorism law, which allowed Beijing to take all necessary measures to put down any activities which they see as threatening the state security. Now, it will only be 9 years later, decades after this entire thing happened, that the controversy will hit a new crescendo when mainstream media such as Reuters, CNN, the BBC, in the month of August 2018, had highlighted a statement by a UN committee calling for the end of the mass internment camps in the Xinjiang province in China to be closed down on the grounds of gross humanitarian rights violation. As quoted, the UN Committee of Elimination of Racial Discrimination cited estimates that up to 1 million Uyghurs may be held involuntary in extra-legal detention centers for Western Xinjiang province, while the report goes on to criticize China's overall human track record. And while there are many notable reactions from various elements of civil society and human rights organizations who protested against this mistreatment, one could definitely say, as previously presented, that the Muslim world on a political level was largely silent about the issue, adopting a non-interference posture. However, Turkey broke this silence with its declaration, as previously mentioned in 2019 February, denouncing China for violating fundamental human rights of the Uyghur Turks and Muslim communities in the Xinjiang province. China, of course, denied these many allegations, and in many instances, in this case, made as to why in the past decades, many claims and allegations should be rightly treated with suspicion and skepticism. Now, on the whole level, when it comes to the Chinese, and especially their rise as a global power, China's rise to global power has largely been a peaceful one, to be fair, with the nation state having undergone significant industrial development that has seen its local economy and wealth of its people grow. It has placed emphasis on cross-cultural engagements as well as developing closer economic ties and military ties with its neighboring countries. There have been undeniably territorial disputes, as mentioned, but China has not undergone, let's just say, any overt military operations in sovereign territories, unlike certain other superpowers. China is also one of the founding members of BRICS, a multi-country initiative that seeks to create an economic system that challenges the dominance of the US dollar. And this exercise in soft diplomacy is undoubtedly all part of the larger geostrategic aim to counterbalance against what China sees as an external threat against its sovereignty. With all of this Chinese initiative and cross-regional and continental economic investments, there are many forces that wish to see this progress of the Chinese state undermined and the progressiveness of the People's Republic, and one could make the argument that the Uyghur issue, while having many truly legitimate concerns, has been appropriated for that same region. It is a fact that the Uyghurs are targeted by China's widespread surveillance and anti-terrorism campaign. And it is a fact that the internment camps continue to house many of the Uyghur communities are operated in a highly secretive manner. In fact, that is the highly secretive nature of how China has conducted itself, especially in regards to the Uyghur issue, and has made rebuttals of the Chinese officials very difficult to be taken seriously as legitimate truths. However, as the Chinese saying goes, 三人称呼, which teaches the danger of how a repeated rumor can be perceived as fact, we must therefore fully investigate to discern the truth. We must, in our own way, pursue the truth of balance, and one must look at where the criticisms and the attacks on the Chinese have actually originated from. Because, as mentioned, there is truth to the claim that there are many groups out there that seeks to undermine the integrity of China. One such example that brings doubt to the accusation, of course, would be the UN report itself. While it is accurate that the claim was made by the UN Committee of Elimination of Racial Discrimination, what was not mentioned by many media sources was the fact that the member of the committee that does not speak for the UN as a whole, and happens to be the only American on the team, Gay Mondogal, has no background or scholarship in the research of China. The claim was then echoed by the Mauritian member, Yele Min Mohamed. Furthermore, much of the accusation which the report has cited were based on thinly sources made from a Chinese opposition group that had received funding from foreign governments that is closely tied to exiled pro-US activists, and the videos of the sessions with Mondogal provided no sourcing of her claims. It is also worth noting that many of the information about the internment camps had actually exclusively originated from media outlets and organizations funded by the American government. This part is a fact. One such example is in fact at the World Uyghur Congress itself, whose offices are not only based in Washington, but they are also funded by the US State Department via the National Endowment for Democracy, who have a notorious reputation for funding activities to undermine governments as part of the US regime change strategy, whereby they encourage and cause social chaos in countries that the US considers a threat to its hegemonic endeavors. One just needs to point to the 2 grants offered by the NAD to encourage and raise awareness on the Uyghur issues. While China has vehemently refuted these claims, going so far as to even show a video interview with an Uyghur resident within the camps going by the name of Abdul Rahim Hayit, you probably all have seen the video itself in question, who has made claim he has never been abused by the Chinese authorities during the internment, the rebuttal has understandably and legitimately been met with a large degree of skepticism because it was actually published through the Chinese state-owned media. The skepticism and lack of trust towards China and the communist government has much to do with the trust deficit it has genuinely earned for itself, for its nature of the issue, given the nature of the issue, and its highly secretive approach it has adopted when dealing with matters pertaining to the Uyghurs. Now, China could be telling the truth. Let's just humor that for a moment. China could be telling the truth about the Uyghurs and its treatment, but there is a very good chance that no one's going to believe them. China, throughout its long history of secrecy and suppression of information and its attempts to exercise tight control of freedom of discourse and its alleged espionage and covert information gathering, actively has undermined its integrity as a power that can be trusted, and this has negatively affected its relationship with its close allies, namely Muslim-majority countries as well, who have had a long history with the Chinese state, while willing to embrace closer ties with China, do so with extreme caution and circumspection. This is the reputation that the PRC has earned. As various critics have also pointed out, though, the West is engaged in full irregular war to destabilize China. The US arguably has created the Uyghur problem as well, or stoked the flames in the matter. It has done so and used the same tactics in Cuba, Venezuela, Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, just to name. And in many instances, one can see the hands of the NAD working here. There have been many critical attacks by civil society organizations who are genuinely concerned for the well-being of the Uyghur groups. And if Beijing is not careful on how it handles this matter, it may find that secrecy will not be a formidable enough defense against those who wish to see the PRC topple. The Uyghur issue presents a potential fault for exactly this to happen, but it may also present the perfect opportunity for China to help rebuild a lot of lost trust. The Chinese actually have a saying, ting wei shu, yan jian wei shi, which means that what you may hear may be false, but what you see is true. This proverb tells us that we should not believe all the rumors very easily, but instead it is more reliable if we verify for ourselves. We at the International Movement for a Just World have previously stated it is in Beijing's best interest to resolve the Uyghur issue in such a manner that the identity and the dignity of the Uyghurs and other minorities in Xinjiang are protected and enhanced. To convince everyone that the Chinese government is willing to address genuine Uyghur grievances, it should invite representatives from civil society in a number of Muslim-majority countries to undertake a fact-finding mission in Xinjiang, whose primary purpose will be to examine and analyze the actual situation on the ground facing the Uyghur community and to the authorities in the province. Members of the mission should have the full freedom to visit the education centers and conduct interviews with the detainees past and present, which I hear as well now has been actually being conducted. But while that is good, the countries from which the members of the missions are drawn and the world at large should also have full access to all these findings. Most of all, one hopes that these recommendations are feasible and Beijing and Xinjiang will try to implement them with sincere trust. If that is done, it is quite conceivable that the chapter of the Uyghurs will be brought to a close. The global community is looking for an alternative to the existing system, away from the dominance of Western hegemony, and many sees China as being pivotal for the most needed change. But its trust deficit impedes it from making any meaningful progress. The negative perception towards China could also have a long-term negative repercussion for China's One Belt, One Road initiative, since it also involves many Muslim-majority countries who are also monitoring the Uyghur issues and may potentially face a lot of domestic pressure as of right now, especially from their local civil society groups, which will affect relations with China and the future economics of political developments. Therefore, the Chinese government, in the interest of continuous cooperation and growth, should allow for representatives of civil society to come and see for themselves what's going on and be more open. Because the fact is, the world is tired of all the lies, secrecies, and mistruths that are already presented in the existing system. The Uyghur issue is one of China's greatest tests, and resolving it will secure China's economic position and fortify its role as an alternative power to promote meaningful change, especially in the area of enhancing human dignity, but only if it is willing to embrace the opportunity and to show that it is trustworthy. Thank you very much.